This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. There's always a chance, Doctor, as long as one can think. It's The Great Mouse Detective, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We're going to get right into it. We got to talk about The Great Mouse Detective. Don't have all of our segments, but we got quite a bit to get into. So we're going to jump right in with Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
If you have not watched or read The Great Mouse Detective, or it's not called, the book's not called The Great Mouse Detective. It's called Basil of Baker Street.
Yeah.
Oh, they rebrand. You got to rebrand.
Yeah, it's rebranded.
Okay, I looked down at Katie's book and it does say The Great Mouse Detective, and I was like, oh yeah, they retitled it for post movie release, I would imagine. But yes, it is called Basil of Baker Street. If you have not read the book or watched the movie recently, here is a brief summary sourced from Wikipedia of the film. In London in June 1897, a young mouse named Olivia Flaversham is celebrating her birthday with her single father, toymaker Mr. Flaversham. Suddenly, a bat with a crippled wing and a peg leg bursts into the toy shop, kidnapping Flaversham. Flaversham? Probably Flaversham. I don't know. Olivia leaves to find Basil of Baker Street, the famous Great Mouse Detective, but gets lost. David Q. Dawson, a retired army surgeon mouse newly returned from Afghanistan, meets Olivia and escorts her to Basil's residence. Being busy already, Basil initially dismisses them. Olivia then mentions that the bat that abducted her father, and Basil realizes that Olivia saw Fidget, the assistant of Professor Ratigan, the criminal mastermind whom Basil was working to catch. It is then revealed that Ratigan kidnapped Flaversham to create a clockwork robot replica of the Queen of the Mice, so that Ratigan can usurp her place as supreme ruler of all mousedom. Flaversham initially refuses to participate in the scheme, but capitulates when Ratigan threatens to harm Olivia. Meanwhile, Fidget appears in Basil's window, then suddenly disappears. Basil, Dawson, and Olivia take Toby, Sherlock Holmes' pet basset hound, to trail Fidget's scent. They trace Fidget to a human-sized toy shop. While searching the area, Dawson finds Fidget's checklist, and Basil discovers Fidget has been stealing clockwork mechanisms and toy soldier uniforms. Fidget ambushes and kidnaps Olivia before Basil and Dawson can stop him. Basil then does some chemical tests to the checklist, discovering that it came from the Rat Trap, a tavern near the junction of the sewer and the Thames. Basil and Dawson disguise themselves as sailors and head to the tavern, where they spot Fidget and follow him to Ratigan's headquarters, only to be ambushed by Ratigan and his henchmen. Ratigan has the pair tied to a spring-loaded mousetrap connected to a Rube Goldberg machine of various killing devices. Ratigan then sets out for Buckingham Palace, where his henchmen hijack the Royal Guard's rolls and kidnap the Mouse Queen. Inspired by a remark Dawson made, Basil deduces the trap's weakness, freeing himself, Dawson, and Olivia. At Buckingham Palace, Ratigan forces Flaversham to operate the Toy Queen, while the real one is taken to be fed to Felicia, Ratigan's pet cat. The Toy Queen declares Ratigan the ruler of all mousedom, and he announces his dictatorial plans for his new subjects. After Basil, Dawson, and Olivia save Flaversham and the real queen, they restrain Fidget and Ratigan's other henchmen, while Toby chases Felicia until she jumps over a wall inadvertently into a pack of Royal Guard dogs. Basil seizes control of the mechanical queen, making it denounce Ratigan as a fraud while breaking it into pieces. Realizing Ratigan's treason, the enraged crowd attack, but Ratigan escapes on his dirigible with Fidget holding Olivia hostage. Basil, Dawson, and Flaversham create an airship from a matchbox, balloons, and a Union Jack and set off in pursuit. Ratigan loses Fidget overboard to lighten the load. However, Basil jumps onto the dirigible to confront Ratigan, causing it to crash straight into the Big Ben's clock face. Inside the clock tower, Basil restrains Ratigan, rescues Olivia, and safely delivers her to Flaversham. Ratigan breaks free and attacks Basil. However, when the clock strikes 10, the vibrations cause Ratigan to fall to his death. He attempts to take Basil with him, but Basil grabs a part of Ratigan's dirigible and saves himself. Back at Baker Street, the group recounts their adventures. Flavershams depart for home, and Dawson reluctantly resolves to leave as well. A new client arrives, and Basil introduces Dawson to her as his friend and investigative partner, prompting Dawson to remain and assist in Basil's future cases. There you go. There is a brief summary of the film The Great Mouse Detective. Let's get into it. I have some questions. No Guess Who this week. But again, we have lots of other stuff to talk about, so let's get into my questions in Was That in the Book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
So first off, I have a disclaimer. This is a series. This book is
Yes.
a series, the Basil of Baker Street series. And there were 5 books in that series when this film was made. I have only read the first book in the series, so it is entirely possible that the movie pulled things from other books.
Yes. So
And
if you've
there
read
are-
all of these,
Yeah.
let
and
us
there
know.
are things in your questions that I know that were pulled from other books.
Okay.
So
you'll comment, I assume, on the
Yes.
stuff you know, but there's other stuff that may also come from other stuff that you're just not aware of.
Yeah.
Is your point. Okay. So my first question, when we get right into the story, I want to know if the inciting incident is similar. As I mentioned in the summary, the inciting incident in the film is that a toy maker, a single father toy maker, Scottish toy maker named something Flaversham, Mr. Flaversham, it gets kidnapped by a mysterious bat. And leaving his daughter all alone. And I wanted to know if that was the inciting incident in the film or the book.
it is not, but it's kind of a twist on the main plot of the book, which is a father seeking help from Basil to find his kidnapped twin daughters.
Okay. Any toy maker involved here?
No.
Okay. Well, I have more questions about that later, but we'll get into it, I guess. So then we're introduced in the film to Dr. Dawson, who is our Watson stand-in in this Sherlock Holmes adaptation, shall we say, homage. And he, in the film, he's introduced, he's just returned from Afghanistan, where I checked the timeline, he would have been serving, I believe, in the Second Anglo-Afghan War.
Yeah.
And I want to know if that plot point of Dr. Dawson being an Anglo-Afghan war vet comes from the book, because I also need to know what the heck were the mice doing over there. Why were they in? I don't know.
I don't think the book ever specifically mentions that he's a war vet. I don't think. But I'm pretty sure it's just a correlation to Dr. Watson, who was a war
Yes,
vet in
that's
the original
definitely
stories.
what it is. Yeah.
But I would assume that the British mice were colonizing the Afghan mice.
I know nothing about that
mean,
war.
I
so
also know nothing about
I
it,
couldn't
but like
begin
I
to
know
tell
the
you.
history of Britain in
Yes.
general. So
Yeah,
like
I believe that, and I believe there's definitely at least some level, because I think when I did a very quick look, the Anglo-Afghan War was, I believe it was almost a proxy war between like Afghanistan and I want to say like the British Raj of India or something like that. It was
that
basically,
makes sense.
and so it was Britain, and I think Britain was fighting, but it was like mainly they were, anyways, almost like a proxy war kind of deal. What it sounded like, I don't know. I'm sorry, I have no idea. I literally just looked at the year to see what war that would have been, because we knew it was 1897 that Dawson would have been returning from. But yeah, I don't know what the mice would be doing over. I guess they're still enlisted in this universe, or they go on their own. I don't
know.
We
I
don't
mean,
we
the-
don't get
the
much about the
mouse
inner workings
world
of the mouse world.
But it appears to be a direct mirror of
Absolutely.
the human world.
Yes.
So
There's a monarchy. There's
I
a queen.
can only
there's-
assume that they were also fighting a proxy war.
One would
I don't
assume.
know.
Who knows? So then we're introduced to Basil, who is the Basil of Baker Street, the titular Basil, the great mouse detective himself, who is our Sherlock Holmes stand-in. And very early in the movie, after Dawson meets him, we get this introduction, or we get this line where he literally just quotes a direct line from, maybe the most famous direct line from Sherlock Holmes, where he's talking to Dawson, and he says, "It's elementary, my dear Dawson," which is just legit, straight up Sherlock Holmes rip. And I wanted to know if the book was as like overt in the fact that this is just Sherlock Holmes, down to like using lines from Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, but not the same way that the movie does it.
Okay.
So the movie essentially is just he is the Sherlock Holmes of mice, right?
Right. Yes.
He doesn't have the same name. It's not like it's an adaptation of Sherlock Holmes, but
Where he's
all of the
just Sherlock
characters are
Holmes,
mice.
yes.
But he is essentially Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
And we do see human Sherlock Holmes in the background as like an Easter egg kind of
In the book.
thing. No, in the
In
movie.
the film,
In the
yes,
movie,
yeah.
yeah. The book's approach is different. Basil in the book is obsessed with Sherlock Holmes and wants to be
Oh.
like just like him. And he'll like sit and like listen to him talk about his cases in his parlor, and then he like takes his trash and he has a little shrine to Sherlock Holmes in his parlor.
Okay.
I preferred what the movie was doing, I will say.
I think that could we obviously don't see any of that in the movie, but we'll get to. I have a question later about kind of a similar topic where I think that could also exist in the movie's universe, then we just don't see it.
That's fair, I
But
guess.
but to be fair, like to your point, in the film, none of that is. He is not like obsessed with Sherlock Holmes and stuff. I have a question because we find out later he literally lives in Sherlock Holmes's home.
Yes.
He lives in
Yeah.
212 Baker Street or B Baker Street or whatever. Hence the name Basil of Baker Street. But yeah, it was interesting. And but in the book, I guess my main question is, does he ever directly like quote Sherlock's home lines in the book?
I think so, yeah. He does say
okay.
elementary in the
Okay.
books from my memory, yeah.
Okay. So then we're introduced in the film to our antagonist of the film, which is Ratigan, who's the evil giant rat. And I wanted to know if that was our antagonist in the book, because we knew, obviously, that, like you said, this is going to pull from probably multiple different books, and we weren't sure if it was maybe more of just the characters and how much of the story would be the same. And so I'm interested to know if maybe everybody's favorite evil rat, Ratigan, comes from the book.
In the disappointment of the century, Ratigan does not appear in this book.
Oh, no.
I know. I was pretty disappointed. He is a central antagonist in the series. He appears in other books, but he is not in this first book. This obviously is better in the movie.
So in this instance, at least, the character does exist in the series and is probably a similar role of seemingly like Moriarty to his to Basil's Sherlock Holmes. At least that's the vibe you get in this movie. It's hard to tell, but he's been working on other cases investigating Ratigan, and the way he talks about him is like he's kind of his nemesis or whatever, which again is the whole deal with Moriarty. So I assume that's what's going on. But we'll never know because they only made one of these movies. If he would have returned for, I actually have a question about, or I had a note about that later, that they could have had him return. Maybe,
they could have,
maybe.
Yeah.
So speaking of Ratigan, now we know Ratigan isn't in this book, but I'm interested to know if the antagonist in this book, is their plan to create a copy of the Queen of Mice so that they can then usurp the throne essentially and become ruler of all mousedom, because that is the central narrative in this.
Right.
Is that's Ratigan's plan.
This plot line does not come from the book. So the book's main plot line revolves around a gang of mouse thugs called the Terrible Three. And they have kidnapped this pair of twin mice girls to try and strong-arm the residents of Homestead, which is a mouse neighborhood built in Sherlock Holmes' cellar.
Okay.
To try to strong-arm them into leaving their homes so that this gang can use it as their headquarters instead.
Okay.
I think the movie's plot is more interesting. I like the higher stakes.
Yeah, it definitely does. And so I think, because it wouldn't surprise me if you said this is obviously a series of books with at least 5 of them, and then they rebooted, or they started making more of them not too long ago, within the last decade or so. It wouldn't surprise me if so you said they're called does this have a subtitle? Does this book have like a subtitle, like other, you know what I mean? Like, does it
No.
have like a? So I was wondering if, because is The Power of Three a Sherlock Holmes story?
I don't know.
I'm going to admit something very horrifying. The vast majority of my Sherlock Holmes knowledge comes from the BBC Sherlock
no.
starring Benedict
Oh, no.
Cumberbatch, which I know is not, the maybe the most faithful adaptation of Sherlock ever necessarily, but that is where the vast majority of my knowledge comes from, because I did watch the first 3. I didn't finish the series because they made a season later. I don't think I finished it, but anyways, I watched most of it. Enjoyed it at the time. My point being, I'm wondering if in the book series, if it's doing a more direct adaptation of like Sherlock Holmes stories, like if they're basically, if she was this author was like taking the narratives from traditional Sherlock Holmes stories and then doing like mice version of them with some twists and that sort of thing.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I am not well read enough. Like, I've not read enough Sherlock Holmes to say that for certain. I didn't see anything when I was researching these books that like indicated that to me.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. Well, either way, regardless, my point that I was kind of getting at still stands, which is that it makes sense to me that making the movie, they go, okay, we want to make a movie based on the series, kind of. We like the idea of Sherlock Holmes, who's a mouse. Let's just jump straight to like a big story that involves this version of Moriarty, as opposed to like, because they probably knew they most likely weren't going to make another one or
Right.
whatever. This kind of wasn't really Disney's, at least theatrically, that wasn't really Disney's MO, was like, making sequels to,
Right, not at the time.
time, to making sequels to their animated films. So they're probably thinking this is a one-off, so they're like, all right, let's just use Ratigan, who's our Moriarty. Let's make the story much more high stakes. Whereas if they had been doing this maybe as a series or something, they may have been more inclined to stick to, like, for the first one in the introductory story, be a little bit more restrained and have the story not be quite as grand as this one ends up being, would be my guess.
Yeah, no, I agree.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting in this movie that I did not recall is that Ratigan, despite his name, is very self-conscious about the fact that he's a rat. Or is he a rat? I don't know. I assume he's a rat. But when people call him a rat, he's like, how dare you? And he feeds them to his cat. What was it? Felicia? His giant cat that he has. And I wanted to know if... Oh, well, okay. So yeah, you're not going to know, but maybe you'll know something. My question was if Ratigan is similarly self-conscious about being a rat in the book where he like says he's a mouse. Because I thought that was a strange, interesting choice.
Yeah. So according to Wikipedia, he is actually a mouse in the books.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure he is supposed to be a rat in the movie.
Oh, definitely. I would think. He looks like a rat compared to the rest of them.
Physically, he doesn't look like he's supposed to be one of the mice. No. He looks like a rat.
He looks like a rat for sure.
I do think the movie's take is more interesting, like an insecure rat.
Yeah, who
wants to be a mouse.
To be a mouse. Yeah, it definitely gives him some underlying sort of motivation. I don't know if motivation is the right term, but some underlying baggage.
Yes.
That helps motivate his villainy.
His desire to rise up.
Yes. Yeah, that is interesting. Okay. But speaking of Felicia, the giant evil cat that he feeds that he calls with a bell and feeds his minions to, I wanted to know if that came from the book that you were aware of.
This is not from the books that I know of. I'm a little mixed on Felicia. I think it's interesting. But I cannot stand for cat slander.
Is it slander? It's just eating mice. What's the slander?
I mean, she's not exactly like a nice character.
No, but are cats not allowed to be evil?
I mean, we could get into the systemic portrayal of cats.
I get what you're saying. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It's very, very typically, for a long time, cats are treated poorly in movies and are, in comparison at least to dogs, are seen as more cruel. Like,
yes, cats typically portrayed as
cold,
villainous,
yeah.
selfish, cold.
Yeah,
Dogs portrayed as noble,
Right.
selfless,
exactly.
etc., etc.
Yeah, and this movie very much leans into that with Toby the bloodhound versus Felicia the cat.
Yeah.
Definitely the case. And so I get that, but
it's
that
it's
aside,
fun.
cats can be villains.
Yes.
It's just a problem when all cats are villains. And yes, this was part of that problem. So, speaking of Toby, on the other half of the equation, I wanted to know if Toby the Bloodhound came from the book, and if Toby the Bloodhound also ostensibly belongs to Sherlock Holmes, because I believe that is Sherlock Holmes' dog in the film.
Yeah, that seems to be.
Yes.
Unless he belongs to Watson, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, and tagging on to that, because this is how they're able to get access to Toby, does Basil just live in Sherlock Holmes' home?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I was not
'Cause
expecting
he's obsessed
that.
with him.
Right. And I guess that makes sense. And after hearing that he's obsessed with him, I truly did not realize that was the case. We mentioned in the prequel and stuff that I was like, I bet this unlocks a bunch of memories in my brain because I know I've watched this movie, and it didn't really. I think I must have watched it so young that it's just mostly gone. Because there was very little of this movie that, like, there was hints of it where I was like, oh yeah, I kind of vaguely remember this, but like not really. Like, it wasn't in the same way that some other movies we've done where I'm like, oh yeah, like Holes or whatever, where it's like, yeah, I haven't watched it in 10 years, but like I remember this movie very vividly. This one, not as much. There's some elements here and there, but overall not. And him like being directly Sherlock Holmes and like living in Sherlock Holmes' actual house was not something I recalled. So that's interesting. But the dog Toby the Bloodhound from.
As far as I know, Toby is a movie edition.
Okay.
And while I do love the addition of Toby, I also, on the flip side, think that having a bloodhound who leads them right to the bad guy feels a little bit like cheating.
Yeah, it's definitely an
Like, he didn't really have to do any detective work.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. He definitely just kind of like, all right, and
Here's the thing.
And he
All right,
takes
let's
him.
go, Toby.
Yeah, that's fair. But then they realize they need to get to this this club, this seedy little bar down by the Thames. And in order to get in, they disguise themselves as sailors because it's down by the river, so it's populated. Its patrons are mostly like dock workers and stuff. They're like sailors and dock workers and everything. And I wanted to know if they go to a seedy nightclub and have to pretend to be sailors. And then also, was that a Smee reference? Is Dawson intentionally dressed kind of like Smee, or was I imagining that?
So they don't go to a seedy club in the book. They do disguise themselves as sailors for a good portion of it.
Okay.
I know. I got very excited because I was like, "Oh my god, something I recognize from the movie."
Yeah.
But they're disguised as sailors because they are in a port town, trying to blend in with the locals,
Okay.
so that they can find out.
At least a hint of an idea.
Yeah, very
there.
similar.
Yeah.
And Dawson does wear an eye patch in the book, so that is also similar.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure the movie's version is meant to be a reference to Smee.
I
Yes,
assume he sure
it's
looked.
the crop top.
Yes.
The crop top is the dead
the crop top
giveaway.
and the little slouchy hat
Yeah.
thingy that he had. He has a little slouchy cap that Smee has, I think. So yeah. All right, let's get to the big one. the big question on everybody's mind. The Sexy Mouse Cabaret. Wow. Did this come from the book?
It was certainly a thing.
It was certainly a thing. They go to a cabaret. Initially, there's like an octopus juggling or something like that. They boo them off the stage, and then a lady mouse comes out and sings a song initially, but then the curtains close briefly, and then it opens back up, and she is now wearing far less clothing than she was in the previous version. Garters and all. Thighs for days. Mouse thighs for days. And I wanted to know if any of this comes from the
I'm
book.
going to put that on a t-shirt. Mouse thighs for days. So to probably no one's surprise, this is not from the book.
Yeah.
Now, objectively, I think this is a pretty neutral addition to the film.
Yeah, it doesn't really do
like,
much of anything.
It doesn't really do much of anything.
Yeah.
I don't think it really detracts
No.
personally. It's
Mm-mm.
just like a kind of funny thing that happens.
Right.
For me personally, I'm going to call it better in the movie because I think this scene is hilarious.
This is true.
Like, I have always found it funny that this mild striptease scene exists in a Disney movie
It's wild.
at all.
Yes.
But my sister and I also have about a half dozen inside jokes about it. um, the main one being the lyric, like at one point she sings, "I'll take off all my blues."
Mm-hmm.
And we would like clutch our pretend pearls and look at each other and gasp, "She was only wearing blue. She was only wearing blue." But this scene is now even funnier to me, knowing the possibly true backstory
Yes.
that we discussed in the prequel.
Yeah. Emphasis on possibly
Possibly true, because I
Yeah.
think, was that an IMDb,
That was an IMDb
trivia fact?
Yes, so
But
possibly
the
true.
trivia fact, possibly true, was that they had decided that it was okay to include this scene specifically because it's mouse burlesque
Yes.
and not human burlesque. If it had been a
Yes.
human, that would have been
Not
bad.
allowed.
But a mouse is fine. And
Yes.
like, to me, that is such a chef's kiss perfect encapsulation of American Puritanism.
Yes.
It's so Hays Code coded.
Yeah.
I love it. 10 out of 10, no notes.
Yeah. It's also, yeah, it's, I believe I also read that it was edited down a fair amount, nearly cut several times because, yeah, there was concerns, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately was left in the film. There was also, I discussed at the end of the prequel episode that maybe this is partially involved in the reason that supposedly this movie was delayed coming to home video was because of this scene, potentially. I don't know how true any of that is. I'm sure there was at least controversy. Based on all the stuff I saw, there was definitely at least some controversy about it and whatnot. Again, who knows how true the specifics of that all are. I'm sure there's a fascinating documentary out there somewhere or something, or a book or something that I was not able to, that I did not track down. But yeah, it's a scene. It's definitely just a burlesque scene
Yeah.
in the middle
just in the middle
of
of
a
a Disney movie.
animated kids movie.
Just a little mouse singing about taking her clothes off and
Yep.
drinking beer.
And this is what this is the America that the right wants to go back to. This is our good, pure, clean fun that.
I'm fine with it.
Again, I am also fine with it. I don't think there's really. I think this is like, depending on the age of the child and stuff, but I think this is on the edge of like, yeah, if your kid's like, you know, I don't know what age, but like
And,
this
like,
is.
I
think
say,
this is a
too,
perfectly reasonable.
that I remember watching this movie as a kid.
Yeah,
And I don't think I watched it a ton as a kid.
Yeah.
I was a little bit scared of it
yeah,
because there are a lot of like kind of darker moments. There are a
Yeah.
few jump scares.
yeah.
But I had no memory of that particular scene until I watched it as an adult. And I was like, what is this?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think you wouldn't really get, because it's
Yeah.
not like she's like nude or whatever, and you don't have the context of like cabaret or
Yeah,
burlesque
no.
to really know like what she's just singing a song in a somewhat revealing outfit, kind of, but like, you know what I mean. So it's not really. Again, I don't think without context that kids would really know necessarily what was going on here. And unless you really listen to like you said, your line or the thing your sister talk about how she's I'll take off all my blues, and like you would never notice
No, not in a million years.
no, any of that stuff you would never have noticed. So yeah, I think it's fine, but it is just funny to me that but it is, it's very straight, I guess, so that's why it's fine according to the modern right. This is fine as long as it's straight. Mouse burlesque, then it's good. If she had been doing it for an audience of women, we would have had issues.
Or if it had been mouse
Or
drag.
if it had been mouse drag, we would have had
That would
issues.
have been terrible.
Anyways, she's an attractive mouse. What are you gonna say? What are you gonna do? Does Ratigan trap them? So then we get to the part where they're chasing. They go after Fidget, and they get to Ratigan's hideout, but they end up getting captured.
Yeah, it was a trap.
It was a trap, a ruse, and they get tied down to a mouse trap because it was a trap. Get it? So they're tied down to a mouse trap, and then Ratigan has set up this very elaborate Rube Goldberg device, which I didn't even realize that the Wikipedia it's just what it is. It's a bunch of different like weapons and stuff
Yeah.
that are all triggered by like a record player starts and then it
Like
pulls a
marble
string and it pulls a cork and
rolls
then
down.
yeah. And it does this like step-by-step thing, and then eventually it ends with them getting hit by the mousetrap, shot with a gun, hit with an axe, shot with an arrow, and like smashed with an anvil or
It's
whatever.
the most cartoony thing in the whole movie.
Very Looney
really.
Tunes, yeah. And I wanted to know if this whole scene where they're tied to this ridiculous Rube Goldberg machine and have to escape just in the nick of time comes from the book, because I thought it was a fun scene, and this is one of the scenes that I remembered. That I was like, as a kid, I was like, I remember this because I thought that was a lot of fun. Rube Goldberg devices are delightful always. And this is one of those that, definitely stuck in my head.
This is not from the book, at least not the book I read. And this is definitely better in the movie. This is actually my favorite scene in the entire movie. Everything about it is hilarious and iconic.
Yes.
From Radigan's Goodbye So Soon song. Like, if you listen to the lyrics of that, they're actually pretty funny.
Yes.
And to smile everyone when they get out of the trap.
They get out of the trap and they take the
off.
photo, yeah.
And it makes me hope that Radigan survived his fall off of Big Ben just so that he can see that photo.
Absolutely. I also love because it feels very in line with Sherlock Holmes style character that Basil it just kind of accepts death and gives up. He's like, like after they're captured, he's like, I'm an idiot. What are we gonna? He's just like,
And then he has a brain blast.
But then he has like a brain wave, and it's like, I got it, and then comes up the most ridiculous nonsense
just
to get
doing
them out
equations in his mind.
and that all boils down to like set the thing off, timing, basically just time the trap so that when the marble falls, the mousetrap hits the marble, right?
Mousetrap catches
so
it.
that catches the marble, which keeps that from the mousetrap from killing them, and then they're able to get out essentially after some other hijinks. But yeah, it's a great scene. It's a lot of fun, and it's I agree. I really enjoyed it, but not in the book, or at least not in this book. So then, they get to the. I skipped a lot of stuff because it's not super important, but they get to the Buckingham Palace where Ratigan has usurped the queen's throne with a robot queen that the toy maker has created for him at threat of violence to his daughter. And he has usurped the throne, but they show up, as I said in the summary, they're exposing blah blah blah, but then Ratigan escapes. And he escapes on his dirigible because, of course, he has a dirigible, which is fantastic.
What is a story set in this time period without a dirigible?
Yes.
Can you even have one? No.
But that's my main question. I wanted to know if there's a large dirigible chase at the end of the book that includes Basil creating his own hot air balloon. It's not a hot air balloon, I guess, but his own aircraft out of balloons and like a Union Jack and a matchbox to chase down Ratigan. Because this all felt very movie to me, especially the way it all plays out. Like this big like chase scene in the dirigibles. I want to know if it came from the book.
You're correct in your assumption that it feels very movie, because absolutely none of this is from the book. And it is a very movie climax, but it's worlds more exciting than the book's climax, which does feature a brief encounter with an owl, but otherwise is pretty anticlimactic.
What happens with the owl?
So basically they are able, with the help from the local police force, they're able to capture the Terrible Three. And then they have to go find this carpenter mouse who this gang was like, what's the word? Like strong-arming.
Oh, okay.
Threatening.
Blackmailing,
yes.
Okay.
Into helping them. So they go find him, and they're like, we caught the gang. Can you take us to the twins? And he's like, yes, I will take you to the twins, and takes them directly to the twins. And then there's an owl for a minute, and they're like, oh no, an owl. And then they go get the twins, and they take them home, and everything's fine.
All right. Well, hooray. They succeed. But yeah, I assumed none of that was in the book. And then also almost at the end here, my questions. I assume not, based on what we talked about in the prequel and what I know about this scene, but does any of our big final climactic face-off inside of Big Ben take place in the book?
No, we do not see the inside of Big Ben in the book.
Yeah.
I do think it's a really neat set piece.
Yeah.
And I think it still looks pretty
It actually
good.
looks really good. We talked about, so a lot of this is CGI, which was kind of one of the first big kind
it
of
was really new
computer
at the time,
generated scenes in a Disney movie. A lot of times, like Little Mermaid and stuff gets referenced as having some of the first CGI in Disney, but this whole scene is, or inside with the gears and stuff, parts of this are all CGI. I'm sure there's different ways for what counts and what, I'm sure there in this, but anyways, if you didn't listen to the prequel, I had a feeling this wasn't in the book because we had mentioned that one of the animators, I believe, or artists or something, came up with this idea to have them. Originally, it was all supposed to take place on the front of Big Ben, and they had decided to have them go into Big Ben because that one of the animators had seen a Japanese animated movie, and it was actually Hayao Miyazaki's first film that he worked on, I think as an animator, not as like a director or anything. And so they had kind of pulled the inspiration from that. It's a very cool scene. Like you said, it holds up really well. There was one thing in particular I thought was really cool, and the movie doesn't really do anything else like this. It was maybe the most modern looking shot in the movie to me, and maybe that also has to do with the CGI and stuff. But there's this moment where the camera is looking at Basil. They've like fallen through the clock, and they're on a gear, and Basil is like getting up from the ground. He's like recovering because they've just like fallen through this clock face, and the gear is rotating, and Basil is rotating, and then because the gear is rotating, Ratigan like rotates into frame, like his back, like staring at Basil, and it's super cool. It's like a super creepy moment because you're not expecting him, and he just like it revolves him into the camera frame. Super cool little moment. And again, I was like, well, it's just like it felt like a very modern shot to me in a way that just didn't really fit it, but I was like, that's really cool. So yeah, just little things that I thought were neat. And then my final question is at the end, the clock strikes 10, as we mentioned, and Ratigan slips and falls off the face of Big Ben, seemingly to his death. And I wanted to know, and then right after, Basil then falls as well. He like Ratigan like grabs him, and they both fall seemingly to their death. But at the last second, it's revealed that Basil like caught a piece of the dirigible that was falling.
He caught like the little bicycle pedals with
that had like the propeller, and is like using it as like a one-man helicopter basically to fly back up to them. Very silly, but I wanted to know if most importantly, if there's like a big moment where everybody thinks Basil died, but then he's actually alive.
No, Basil is never once thought to be dead in the book. Again, I do think this is a good change. Book's ending pretty anticlimactic, in my opinion.
Yeah. I had it in my odds and ends, but I was mentioning it here because I think it makes more sense. And I mentioned it earlier. You were talking about how you were hoping Ratigan survived just so he could see the photo that they took when they escaped the trap earlier. And I was wondering if maybe he could have, because I don't know if rats are one of these animals, but a lot of small animals like that can fall from very like squirrels can fall like hundreds of feet and survive because their like terminal velocity is not fast enough to like cause them harm, basically, because they're so light mixed with like the surface of their body and how much air it catches. I don't know if rats are one of those creatures that can fall and survive like from great heights or not, but I know like squirrels and like cats to some extent. I don't know how high it is, but like anyways, there's lots of small animals like that can fall from pretty high heights and still be fine. And so it's very possible if they made a sequel and wanted to bring Ratigan back, they could use that as their explanation, I feel like. But again, maybe rats can, I don't know. I have no idea how that works, but I just know it's a thing. Anyways. All right, those are all my questions. Didn't have anything for Lost in Adaptation, either questions about what's happening or thematic stuff. Not really anything. And that's, again, like 101 Dalmatians, a lot of these kind of Disney movies from this era. Not a lot that at least to me, not saying a lot that I find super interesting, which makes sense. It's a kid's movie, like whatever. It's not raising deep seated thematic questions. But I will say I think that is something that newer Disney movies are a little better on.
Yeah.
Is they actually delve a little bit more into like
Yeah.
some kind of deeper questions about like meaning and blah 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 that I think I find more interesting. But there's nothing wrong with just having a nice fun little adventure story. Anyways, time now to find out what Katie thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
I mentioned the encounter with the owl near the end of the book. I still think that the movie's ending is overall better, but I do think it would have been interesting to perhaps interact with a bird.
I mean, sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
I was
Sorry,
still scratching for things a little bit here.
I think it would have been fun to interact with a bird. I mean, yeah, why
Well,
not?
initially I was thinking like, oh, it might have been fun to interact with some other animals, and then I realized that we do interact with other animals in this film, a dog,
a dog and a
cat,
cat
and a bat.
primarily, and a bat. Yeah.
But a bird of prey could have been interesting.
Yeah.
Could have been an interesting twist.
Yeah, it could have showed up in the dirigible chase.
Yeah.
Could have worked in an owl there. Yeah,
We could have.
somehow.
My other note here is that I have to say that I think the film's depiction of
Oh, sorry, I just had a great idea. We get the ending where he falls off the thing,
Uh-huh.
and we find out he actually he did the Gandalf like whisper to an owl earlier, and he comes swooping instead of the dumb little helicopter thing. He comes
Basil
swooping up on
comes
an owl.
swooping up on an owl.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
survived because his owl friend or whatever was like waiting and watching. And he like set that up earlier, which is a thing. That's a thing Sherlock would do anyways. Like
That's
have a.
true. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
they could have done. I think that would have been fun. Anyway, sorry.
So I do have to say that I think the film's depiction of mouse society being like within human society raises perhaps more questions than it answers, because we don't really see much acknowledgement of the human world, which I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And while I didn't overall care for the book's fixation on Basil being wanting to be just like Sherlock and like obsessed with Sherlock, I do think that the book did a better job of kind of world building that, like, specifically that idea of like, oh, we're mice and humans still exist. We just have a whole separate society within that society.
Right.
The movie, I think, kind of like brushes over that.
Yeah, it definitely does because it's. I think primarily just for time. 'Cause
Right.
The movie
and
is very
like,
short.
and it doesn't really
No,
matter.
it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really
No.
matter, but like
But that's fair.
we're being picky here.
We're finding. Yeah, you're finding nits to pick. So that's fair. All right, let's go ahead and find out what Katie thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
I liked that Dawson doesn't already know Basil when the story starts, because when the book starts, they're already like a detective duo.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it works a little better for introducing the characters and the world. And also in the book, it ended up feeling a little bit like Dawson was kind of just weirdly obsessed with Basil.
I mean, that's accurate for Watson and
Yeah,
Holmes,
I guess
think.
so.
But yes, it is. They do the origin story. They do.
yeah,
The,
yeah, the
yeah.
movie does the origin story,
Yeah.
whereas the book kind of just plops us right in the middle of things.
It's fine.
I love how Basil has a framed portrait of Radigan on his mantle.
I missed that.
He does. This is so funny to me.
Oh yeah. When he mentions them, yeah.
And then he like points
He,
and
like,
he's
points
got like
at
a
it. Yeah.
framed
It's great.
portrait of his nemesis
Yeah.
on the mantle.
Yeah.
It's really like it's giving like hate is so close to love.
I could see that enemies to lovers thing. I mean,
Yeah.
Radigan's performance is not queer coded. I feel like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it may be a problematic
I mean, really,
way.
it
maybe.
was probably more like lovers to enemies and
Yes.
not enemies to lovers.
Yes,
but
that's that seems more likely. Yeah.
I love the scene in the movie where Basil is using his chemistry set And I liked the look of his apartment in general. We don't get like a really good look at it, but I thought it was a fun depiction, kind of like cluttered and like there's interesting
like
stuff everywhere.
The standard Sherlock messy genius apartment.
The way that Ratigan mocks Basil in this movie does to me feel very true to the Sherlock Moriarty dynamic from the original stories, from multiple depictions over the years.
Including BBC's 2010
feels very
Sherlock.
in line with that. And I also thought that Ratigan going feral at the end of the movie is legitimately pretty scary. Like his big rat claws, creepy.
I mean, and especially when you think, assuming he's a rat and they're mice, a rat is way bigger than depending on the type of rat, for sure, way bigger than mice. So yeah, that makes sense that they would be. Yeah, it's like if you saw, as a human, if you saw like a freaking Bigfoot, it's like yeah, that thing could murder me. All right, let's go ahead and talk about a few things the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
We talked a little bit about this, but the mice in the book do like live in a society within human society.
They live in a society.
They also live in a society, yes. But they're it's basically like a mirror image of the human world for reasons unknown.
Sure, yeah, because it's fun.
Yeah.
Because then that way you don't have to explain anything. You can just go, there's a mouse queen, there's a this, there's a that. It's basically
Dawson is an Anglo-Afghan war vet.
It's exactly the same as the human world, just with mice. You understand. Like, makes your world building a lot easier.
There is a similar-ish scene in the book to when Basil first meets Dawson and he like deduces a bunch of stuff about him just by looking at him.
That's the only time the movie does that, which is the thing that the Sherlock TV series, the BBC one, leans into constantly in a way that's a little obnoxious, but like he only does it once in this movie.
Yeah.
Where he does like the quick deduction, like this, you sewed this, like, whereas Sherlock does that. And again, I don't know how accurate or how true to the rest of the stories the BBC's version of that is, but in the BBC one, he does it constantly all the time to everybody.
But there's like a similar-ish scene.
Yeah.
It's with a different character, obviously, because we already know Dawson in the book.
Yeah.
But there is a very similar scene in the book. And my last similarity here is that both stories end with someone else showing up at Basil's door with a new case for him to solve.
That's a pretty standard Sherlock thing, isn't it? I think so. Cool. All right, let's get to a handful of odds and ends before the final verdict.
I just want to mention that I kind of alluded to this earlier, but there are like 4 or 5 Fidget the Bat jump scares in this movie.
Yeah.
Every single one of them terrified me as a child.
Yeah. He's a creepy, like the
He's
way,
a
and
creepy
I think
little guy.
several times it's like through glass distorted or stuff. Like they do other things to make it even creepier than, But I think Fidget's cute in this movie. I think if you saw a plushie of Fidget with a little peg leg
there was
and
a plushie, he's just a weird little guy.
Yeah, in like a cute way. I think the movie doesn't portray him that way, but I think he would.
Yeah.
Like I think devoid of the context of the film, if you just saw a plushie of Fidget, you'd be like, that's adorable.
I think it would have to be a plushie because I also don't like the way he talks.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. But I think or even just a little action figure. I think if you saw it when you didn't know anything about it, you'd be like, look at that cute little bat with a peg leg. That's adorable. I think.
Yeah.
I just think it's in the movie. He's creepy. But anyways, speaking of adorable, the performance by the little kid who plays Olivia Flaversham is very adorable. Whoever
very cute,
the kid that got to do that voice acting, she or he, I don't know. The character's a girl, but that doesn't mean who knows, because they could have got. But whoever that kid was, I did that very like adorable voice acting performance.
I had forgotten that this movie makes beer look so good.
true.
It makes beer look way better than it has any business looking, and I say that as someone who drinks beer.
Yeah.
It's so foamy, and it
Mhm.
kind of looks like a root beer float.
Yeah. No, they make it's like butterbeer. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. It's got the look of something that is way, definitely, maybe problematic depiction of beer in your kids' movie is to make it look like delicious butterscotch nectar or something. But yeah, it does look pretty tasty.
I had also forgotten that the score of this is very cute.
Mhm.
Like it's it's not incredible. It's not like
Yeah.
earth
Nothing-
shattering, but it is a very cute little score. I like the little main theme.
Mhm. Yeah, and that really like that's my last note too, is that it really, the movie is kind of just a nice and enjoyable little diversion. It's nothing incredible. I didn't like it as much as I was hoping. Again, but that was mainly based on the fact that I thought I was going to remember it more than I
Mhm.
did. And I think what's likely the case is that I had this movie mixed up with The Rescuers and The Rescuers Down Under and probably another two
all
or
the
three
other
movies.
mice movies.
And probably even other things apart
Yeah.
from that, to where I had all of those things banging around in my head and I didn't know what from this movie was actually from that, whereas maybe a lot of the things that I felt like may have been from this movie are actually from again, other movies.
I bet you probably The Rescuers Down Under.
I bet. I know I watched The Rescuers Down Under quite a bit
Mhm.
as a kid, but I thought I also watched this one a lot, but again, it did not ring the bells that I was expecting it to, because I could have swore I watched this a lot as a kid. Maybe I did. And for whatever reason.
You could also be thinking of the Fievel movies.
Yes, that's another
Those
one.
are also
Fievel
mice
Goes West. Yes.
Lots of anthropomorphic mice in this era.
Fievel, an American Tale
Yeah.
or whatever, and Fievel Goes West. Yeah, no, that's another one that I also probably, because I know I watched those. Again, I think all of those got mixed
Yeah.
together, and I just think that I thought more of the stuff I remembered was from this than it was.
And you know what else? Correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a really long time since I've seen the American Tail movies, but I'm pretty sure Fievel Goes West also has like a cabaret scene in it.
Maybe. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it does.
Maybe it does. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Pretty
Maybe
sure
I'd go
it
watch
does.
that, because that was the thing, is that when we got to this, I felt like I had a memory of this, but then when
Yeah.
we watched it, I was like, I don't really.
I bet you're thinking of Fievel Goes
And maybe I'm thinking of
West.
Fievel Goes West, because I know I watched that one too, and maybe that's the one that's banging around in my head. Is that based on a book?
I don't think so.
No, that's too bad.
It's based on the indomitable spirit of the American immigrant.
It's true. But that could also be based on a book. Notably, no American immigrants ever wrote any books about their experience here. Famously, that never happened. Anyways, but point being that I enjoyed the movie, but it wasn't it didn't hit me as much as I was hoping it would, based on what I thought were my memories of it, and then I realized that maybe I just had memories of other movies, so more so than this. I did remember parts of it, and I definitely had seen it, but just didn't. It wasn't the like, oh yeah, this that I was expecting. So I enjoyed it, but nothing to write home about. Before we wrap up, we wanted to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, or Threads, or anywhere else that you can find us on social media. I mean, make sure it's actually us. Those are all the places I know we are. There may be some fake accounts other places, probably not, but
I don't think so.
I
I've never
wouldn't think
looked
so.
for any. I don't know that we're worth spoofing.
I would agree. But you never know. But anyways, my dad gets
I cannot figure that out.
gets a Facebook account copy made of him every other month, and I don't know why, so who knows. I'm sure there's our podcast might be too. Anyways, point being, follow us on all that social media, interact with us. We'd love to hear what you have to say, because then we'll talk about it on the next prequel episode. If you want to do us a giant favor, you can head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever else you listen to our podcast. Drop us a little 5-star rating and write us a nice review. We'd appreciate that. And if you really want to support us, you can head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us there for a few bucks a month. At the $5 and up level, you get access to bonus content. We just released yesterday, actually, our episode on Enchanted. So if you want to hear us talk about Disney's Enchanted, that is our January bonus episode. We do a bonus episode every month for the $5 and up patrons. And yeah, you can hear us talk about Enchanted. And then at the $15 and up level, you get access to priority recommendations, which means if you have something you'd really love for us to talk about, hear what we have to say about it, give us that $15 a month, stick around for a little bit, and then recommend it, and we will throw it to the top of our queue as high as we can get it reasonably with the rest of our schedule, because we book things out months and months and months in advance. But we'll get it up there as soon as we can. And Katie, this one was a request from one of our Academy Award-winning patrons.
Yes, it was. This was a request from Shelby Suderman.
There you go. Thank you, Shelby, for requesting The Great Mouse Detective. Now it's time for Katie's final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
The Great Mouse Detective might not be in the upper echelon of animated Disney, but it is a fun little romp that, in my opinion, has more in common with the return-to-form films of the Renaissance era than it does with the films that came directly before it. It offers fun characters, including an iconic villain, a high-stakes plot, and interesting set pieces, along with animation that still looks pretty good. The book was exactly what I expected it to be. Cute, but nothing groundbreaking or particularly memorable. Like many children's books that we cover, I suspect I would have liked it more were I in the intended age bracket. Overall, I think the movie's choice to retool the overall plot, give Basil a personality outside of admiring Sherlock Holmes, and utilize Ratigan, bolstered by an incredible performance from horror icon Vincent Price, as the central antagonist, all helped elevate the Great Mouse Detective over Basil of Baker Street. For those reasons, I'm giving this one to the movie.
There you go. We didn't really get into it, but yeah, Vincent Price's performance as Ratigan is
it's
fantastic.
Great. Incredible.
It's delightful. It's amazing. I did mention it's maybe slightly problematically queer-coded, but in a fun way, kind of in the way that Disney villains
I mean, he is
be.
playing it as like classic horror kind of villain-y-ish.
Kind of. I don't know. There was more sort of verbose, like, which obviously some classic horror villain, but like there was more like drama, quote unquote, to perform, but in a way that I thought was really interesting. I don't know. It was not what I was
classic,
expecting.
I mean, it's in the oeuvre of like older villains that are like very theatrical and flamboyant.
Yes, which again, but I think that is all rolled up in a
yes. It is. It's Hays Code coded.
Yes. But it's interesting. It's a lot of fun. Incredibly fun performance, and it plays well against sort of Basil's more kind of straightforward Sherlock Holmes. But it's a lot of fun for sure. Katie, what's next?
Up next, we are talking about Never Let Me Go, a 2010 film
that I've never heard of,
based on the 2005 novel by Kazu Ishiguro.
Yes, which we have done before, or that author, right?
Yes, that is the author of
A Room with a View?
No. Also British though. Oh my god, I'm blanking. I just had it.
Oh my gosh, the one with
I want to say A Separate Piece, but I know that's not the right book.
No, the one with Anthony Hopkins who's a butler. Oh my gosh.
Remains of the Day.
Remains of the Day. That's it. Yes. The Remains of the Day. Same author. Another adaptation of a different one of his stories. I've never heard of it. I remember. I really enjoyed Remains of the Day, the book or the film. I thought was an enjoyable little film. So I'm interested to see what this is because I know nothing about it. So I literally had never even heard of it. So that's going to be our next episode. That'll be in 2 weeks' time. We're talking about Never Let Me Go. But in 1 week's time, we'll be talking about what you all had to say about The Great Mouse Detective and previewing Never Let Me Go and all that good stuff that we normally do on those prequel episodes. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
watching movies,
and keep being awesome.